Again, what even is art?
Hello and welcome to the EuroWhat, episode 244, dropping on October 22nd, 2024. We are a pair of Americans trying to make sense of the Eurovision Song Contest. I'm Ben Smith, and I'm here with my co-host, Mike McComb. Hey, Mike.
Hello.
In this episode, we'll be talking about Eurovision and performance art with our special guest, dood-pwah. Hey, dude.
Hello.
Welcome back to the show. It's great to have you back.
It's great to be here.
I've been excited about this one because when I was in Liverpool for 2023, one of my favorite memories from that trip was getting to just meet up with you at the Tate Modern and just sort of have a day at the museum and look at Jenny Holzer stuff and just like a bunch of other stuff they had. Knowing that you had been working on a master's during the pandemic in art history that you had managed to also work Eurovision into was just like, ooh, Halloween is coming up. Let's talk about performance art and costumes.
Last year for Halloween, I went as Marina Abramovich. Which basically involved standing outside with a skeleton on my back.
Yes.
Carrying a skeleton and then getting the person I live with to Photoshop out all the other elements. So I'm really lucky none of the neighbors stopped by. So this year I'm going to a Murder, She Wrote themed Halloween dig. So I'm working on a Murder, She Wrote costume.
Oh, awesome. I just started following a Instagram account that is sourcing the various fashion of JB Fletcher. So, yes, I'm very much on board with this.
Excellent. Yeah, and I need to figure out what I'm doing for work Halloween this year. Because last year, I just brought an apron and was like, I don't know, the bear. And it seemed to go over well. I might just repurpose that this year. And now with the mustache, now it's just Bob's Burgers.
Oh, nice. There we go.
Down to just like everything the exact same as last year.
I'm going to a Beetlejuice themed Halloween party. My husband and I watched Beetlejuice last weekend and just kind of going with one of the normie costumes because that flannel shirt that Alec Baldwin's wearing just looked really cozy. I want to be able to get something that I can wear like after Halloween, like really like make it multi-purpose. So
yeah, no, I think my other favorite one I have done for work is going as like the scariest thing ever, a Slack notification. The logo, the little like notification of how many messages you have left, and a pair of claves that you can make the noise. Getting us slightly back on topic. Part of what you discussed in your thesis was the Yugoslavian New Art Practice, which I'm not super familiar with. What is that?
In 1968, there was a wave of student demonstrations across the world, including in Yugoslavia. And to quell the demonstrations, Tito made a promise to the students of Yugoslavia. And he said, some of what you're complaining about is correct. And one of the things we'll do is pour additional funding into some of the universities that you have. And as part of that, he promised and gave more funding to student art centers in certain universities across Yugoslavia. And out of these art centers, you had suddenly this blooming of a new art movement that was largely conceptual art, body art, land art, video art, performance art. It became known as the Yugoslavian New Art Practice. Some of it happened before 1968, but a lot of it happened post-1968. Marina Abramovich is the most famous practitioner of the New Art Practice, but you also have Laibach coming out of Slovenia. You have Sanja Ivečević. I'm going to mispronounce so many names during this. Sanja Ivečević, who is a famous Croatian artist, and Dalibor Martinez, who's a famous video artist. So all of these people kind of got their start in these kind of amazing just whirlpools of creativity where they were next to radio stations and student newspapers and talking to each other and churning and really coming up with these ideas for art and art practice.
Well, I'm familiar with Abramovich. I think it was at MoMA where the artist is present. The summary of a bunch of her work where she's also just sitting in the lobby and you get to queue in line to like have a moment with her.
Let me put the Yugoslavian New Art Practice in context, because you have a lot of conceptual art coming out in the 1960s and 1970s.
Yeah.
Abramovich actually worked with Ulay, who was a Dutch artist for a lot of the 1970s, so it may not seem very specific to Yugoslavia, but The political climate in Yugoslavia was really unique because it was a communist country that wasn't really a communist country. Tito had kind of put forth 3 principles, which I think are really important to understanding the context in which people created art, and it's important in understanding the context in which we can see and understand art from Yugoslavia today, or the former Yugoslavia. Mm-hmm. So the first is brotherhood and unity, the second is non-alignment, and then the third is socialist self-management. So when we talk about brotherhood and unity, it's what kept Yugoslavia together. And it's essentially that sense of we were all in this together in World War II. We were all the partisans fighting against the Nazis. And then also it was kind of that cult of hero worship around Tito. So you have that real sense of there are things you do to celebrate Tito, and you grow up, everybody kind of does them. So in the United States, everybody knows you do the Pledge of Allegiance, and in Yugoslavia, everybody would have, Youth Day for Tito. So it was kind of part of that cultural sense of celebrating Tito. So when he died, that fell apart, and there's a really strong sense of Yugonostalgia today. The second thing is non-alignment. Tito was one of the leaders of the non-alignment movement and really trying to weave between the West and the East. So even though Yugoslavia was a communist country, it had fallen out with Russia and with Stalin pretty early on. So people in Yugoslavia were in a unique position in having access to goods from the West and trade with the West in a way that many Eastern Bloc countries weren't, but they were also still part of that Eastern Bloc and still living under communist country and still having some degree of communist censorship. And then the third is socialist self-management, which is the way that the communist ideals came down in Yugoslavia. So rather than having a centralized 5-year plan, socialist self-management was the decentralization of economic decisions down to the worker level. And it was the way that people managed the economy in Yugoslavia at the worker level, giving workers and the factories or the universities or the local level a real power of being able to manage the way that their workplace or their local economy was run. So all 3 of those things, which were so prevalent during the Tito years, still have an impact on the music we see today, which is what I was writing about, specifically the songs from Let 3 and Constructa that you see in Eurovision. And there are things in there where it's a great song, and it's a fantastic song, and it works on a song level, but there are kind of deeper cues in it.
To kind of follow up on that, like what was the thesis of your thesis?
So the thesis of my thesis was that the new art practice is still kind of embedded in ex-Yugoslav culture, and you can still see its traces within its Eurovision acts today. And Constructa and Let 3 are still carrying on the new art practice. So Let 3 is essentially bringing Laibach, a Slovenian band, and bringing some of their tricks and techniques to the world stage. Constructa, on the other hand, is really interrogating the meaning of what it is to be an ex-Yugoslavian, kind of trapped between the West and the East, trapped in a place where socialist self-management no longer works because she's not seen as a person. She's an artist, but the state doesn't recognize her as a person to give her health insurance. And she's engaged in a type of body art that's very similar to the type of body art that Marina Abramovic is doing, where she's doing repeated actions like washing her hands and engaging in those as a way of demonstrating, this is my work, therefore I am a person, this is the labor I am doing on behalf of the state, therefore you should give me health insurance.
Oh my goodness, I love this so much.
Thinking about her performance, like her entry from this year's Serbian process, which is continuing that and just like doing meta level things of, we always want the new, so here's a lot of the old, but also new things like, oh, you thought I was washing my hands? Surprise, it's bread.
It's really interesting because looking at her performance of Incorpore Sano as just that 3-minute performance is really difficult because it's actually part of a longer, like 12-minute performance called Triptych, which is, again, another art reference, but it's about representing 3 different women from Yugoslavia, or the former Yugoslavia, and 3 different contemporary women in Serbian life, and one of whom, Incorpore Sano, is, again, it's difficult to say how much of it is constructed as Ana Doric, her real-life person, and how much of it is constructed, but Incorpore Sano seems to be the most that's like her. But in the other 2 songs, she's portraying completely different people. In one of the songs, she's portraying somebody who is a person who has grown up and is really wrestling with Yugonostalgia, because she's talking about how she spent her whole life under the system. She learned French, and under that non-aligned movement, she thought she would have the freedom to go between West and East, but now she still has never made it to Paris. And she talks about when she had a dream that she was dying, but her death would occur with her falling from the Gen X Tower. The Gen X Tower is a big brutalist tower that's in the heart of Belgrade that is supposed to represent the heart of socialist self-management. It represents the place that signifies that Yugoslavia is open for capitalist business, but all of that's going to be plowed back into the state and to local workers. As she's falling from this tower, the other thing she sees is the Orthodox Church that's there. So she's torn between the things that aren't part of the former Yugoslavia, things that are more modern, like the religion that people are celebrating now, and yet the old parts of the state. So it's that struggle between the old and the new, the Yugonostalgia, and where she is now. And she's never going to die, because that will always be an endless fall from the Gen X Tower. It is a pretty tall tower. I went to Belgrade to go see it. It was pretty amazing. But that's one of her songs. Sorry, that was a long digression. And then the other song is a more modern interpretation of a woman who is very much caught up in modern capitalism under the EU. You have the ski trips, you go out to eat, you watch the latest television shows, the kids are going to the right school. And she interrogates in this the emptiness of the modern capitalist life. You know, she's like, I work out, I do this. There's still so much emptiness within my life. So a lot of what Constructa sings about is kind of saying, we're in this spot now where we're out of socialist self-management. And is it all that great? She can't get health insurance. You can get the things which are the trappings of a capitalist life, but are we really happy? And I don't know if we are.
Yeah. Thinking about the first part of that triptych, the old ways and the new ways, is like one of the more fascinating things I've added to my DVD collection in the last year is a compilation of, I think they're Estonian primarily, but just like communist / Soviet era 70s, 80s TV commercials, all from like one director, where like a lot of them are for just like vocational schools, are for learn this trade and sort of like very traditional stuff. And like others are for like are for just like oranges are coming. But you, the person who lives in the society, might not actually get the oranges. Like, who is this TV commercial for?
Yeah. I just want to stress, Construct is not just singing about like how capitalism is in a way an empty promise. She's also singing about how feminism is an empty promise. Because I know we all talk about like the part of the song where she talks about Meghan Markle's hair. Like, it's great. How does she get it so shiny? But her other songs also talk about this. And Newer Better, which is what she came out with this year, is both a critique of capitalism and feminism. What can we do to make things? Why are we always looking for the newer, the better, both in our lives, but also what can we do to make ourselves younger, prettier? And there's a lot of that in her song as well. How do we struggle with our appearance as women and making ourselves prettier and younger and remaining fit? And there's a lot of that in there. And again, that goes back to the body art of Marina Abramović and works like The Artist is Beautiful, where Marina Abramović brushed her hair repeatedly while saying, art is beautiful, the artist must be beautiful, until she started to like tear pieces of her hair out with that repetition and that desire to do something, the thing which made her beautiful, to the point where it actually hurt herself. I think that Construct is interrogating those things as well. What are we doing in this drive to make ourselves more beautiful, to seek youth and beauty, and how is it hurting ourselves as a society and as women?
And that's also fascinating to have that interrogation in the context of Serbia's national selection and Eurovision. Part of the purpose of Eurovision is to demonstrate what is the state of the art, like in terms of television production, in terms of like where music is in the year 2024, 2025. Is it getting better? Is it serving the purpose that the artist is trying to set forth, especially thinking of some of the struggles that artists had at this year's contest in particular, but that come up at every contest where it's just like the fandom, how the art is being presented on stage. And yeah, oh man, like I love Constructa so much. I love this investigation.
But I think the fact that Serbia could send her, I mean, there's also, I think, a point to make between the fact that she was in the band Zemila Gruva, which is a funk band in Serbia that was pretty popular before she became a solo independent artist. And it is as a solo independent artist that she's able to then make these connections and explore these new themes as opposed to being a singer with a funk band. And I also think that perhaps having a background of the new art practice, where this is something that's celebrated in schools and celebrated in culture and state funded, it's something that maybe it's not so surprising to see it on a selection for Eurovision.
So is this still a practice happening today? Like, is there still this level of funding?
I would say no. There is still, I would say, and again, I'm not an expert on the current art scene in the former Yugoslavia. There are still quite a few interesting artists coming up and coming out of the Yugoslavian art scene, but it wasn't like it was where you would get a salary for being an artist from the state, and it was your job to be an artist.
I was wondering if there is going to be some sort of generational divide between younger artists that are up and coming in like former Yugoslavia countries versus like people who were raised in this system, or I guess maybe the children of this system.
This is where Luke Black comes in, because I think Luke Black had with Samo Misa Spava a similarly arty performance that was very staged, but I think it was influenced more from being a citizen of the world and a global citizen and internet culture than from specifically the experience of growing up in Yugoslavia or the former Yugoslavia and having the elements of Tito and the way the system was set up. So if you look at what Luke Black has done, Samo Misa Spava is clearly like that could be something that was produced by other people who really love video games and had issues with the pandemic and are really worried about global issues. So it's not necessarily a Serbian perspective, I would say.
Especially because like he was living in London at the time that he submitted that. So citizen of the world is a good descriptor there. But yeah, like just thinking of some other artists, because like I was trying to just sort of like rack my brain in terms of thinking about performance art and Eurovision, what other artists I thought kind of fit in the same bubble as like your Let 3, your Constructa. Luke Black definitely came to mind just because it felt like it came from a similar place. But also Sylvia Knight for Iceland, Hattari, certainly. The amount of fake websites that Hattari was creating for just their general practice absolutely fits in with this. Verka Serduchka certainly feels like something like that, just given that we keep seeing her. But even like Windows 95 Man this year, like Finland the last couple of years, because Karja on some level, there is Jere and there is Karja, and there's differences happening.
So with Karja, it's really interesting because I feel like I don't know whether I would call that performance art or whether just having a performance persona. I feel like it's kind of like Nicki Minaj maybe having like a Roman or maybe a Sasha Fierce for Beyonce.
Yeah, like a Sasha Fierce. Another recent example that comes to mind, Chapel Roan, of just like, this is my job, this is my performance.
Yeah. I think that's actually a really good way of doing that, because Kárja has talked about this is me on and this is me off. Although he has shared with us to some extent the Jure off screen in a way which I can't figure out. Is that just living life publicly because he's younger and there aren't as many boundaries because the internet's always been there?
I agree that it's much more of like a persona that he puts on as a performer, but also it's like just deeply interesting to me that he has a member of his entourage who is dressed like his previous era. I love Harriet. Desperately want to know just more about like what's his vibe, or just like he's now just like part of the entourage and like that is your job. Windows 95 Man this year, he has various art practices, and like Windows 95 Man appears to be one of them.
Yeah, so when I interviewed Windows 95 Man, I asked him, "Are you a performance artist?" And he said that's for the public to decide. But I do feel like Windows 95 Man is performance art, especially looking at the early iterations of that in videos and how it's evolved over time. Just with the dancing in the jorts, the very, very, like, those very, very tiny, tiny jorts. Like, I would see that in a gallery. That would be a piece of video art that I would see. So for me, it's very clearly performance art.
I mean, I guess maybe this should have been the first question that we asked, but how do you define performance art?
This is a really good question. For me, performance art is defined as having a component to a musical performance that goes beyond a costume or a design. It is something where the performer or group is involved and thinking about the construction of a persona that they're putting on the stage and carrying that out in a way that goes beyond the music. So somebody who wouldn't necessarily define themselves just as a musician in what they do. Windows 95 Man has a gallery. They do art on the side. Their music seems to be something that's part of that broader thing. So I feel like Windows 95 Man is an art practice of the artist.
No Rules was his first single, but he had been doing DJ gigs for like upwards of like a decade before that.
I thought he had actually released a song about taxes.
Okay.
I
feel like
oh, that banger.
Yeah, because like I feel like UMK beforehand had been kind of hyping that angle of it up. Because like I had seen him, again, watching the internet blow up around Kárja, had seen him act as an opener for one of Kárja's gigs.
Luke Black is fascinating, but they're primarily a musician.
Yeah, I would agree.
So they put a lot of thought into their stage outfits and stage personas, and they're involved in the creative side of things. But I think there's not a divide between Luke Black, the musician, and Luke Black, the person. I mean, I'm sure that there's stuff that we're not seeing and that's being held back, but it's not a construction that's being put on stage. Whereas with Let 3, clearly they are creating something. They build props. They are doing other things on stage. They've been involved in the creation of art spaces. Constructa, her name translates to construct. Like,
yeah. And then like again, like Hattori build themselves as like a anti-capitalist, art project essentially. The music is there, but there were multiple levels of fake website being created around what the band is trying to do. They're
culture jamming,
yes.
And and everybody in Iceland is a multi-hyphenate because it's got 400,000 people, but they are following the culture jamming playbook, and the music is one way into that, but it goes beyond the music for sure.
Yeah, and like this feels like very much part of all of their various art practices, because Matthias was a playwright, Clemens does beautiful woodworking. I've continued to follow him on Instagram. Highly recommend. Very skilled carpenter. Einar is still doing production work with people like Bashar Murad, but Clemens and Einar are both doing other music that sounds nothing like Hattori, where like Hattori is like a very specific, this is what we want to communicate, here's how we're going to do it, these are the visuals, these are the costumes.
They're thinking out the script for every interview. Like there's a look, there's a feel. When Einar was presenting points and taking off the mask to reveal another mask, like these are levels of jokes, which are all part of that larger persona. So it's art. It's performance art.
Another Icelandic act that's another one that kind of blurs the lines for me that I was trying to figure out how it fits in is like Sylvia Night, because that was a performance that extended it off of the Eurovision stage.
Sylvia Night's a very Andy Kaufman-esque kind of thing. Because Sylvia Night is a role being played by this comedian, but they have to embody it for the entire Eurovision week, and they did not drop that role.
No.
So I think it is performance art because they carried it through they didn't go backstage and then were suddenly nice to everybody else. They kept on being Sylvia Night. So yeah, I would say that's performance art.
One question I had written down before this chat, why are all of the examples that come to mind from either like Iceland or other Nordic areas, or just like the former Yugoslavia? And I think it's, again, just like the new art practice was just like, here is money from the government to be a musician, where like that's no longer present in areas like Croatia and Serbia now, but there is a history there. And then Iceland, again, talking about everybody being a multi-hyphenate, there is some level of enablement for artists in the area to make a living and get to be creative and practice.
I think that is the case. And if you're looking at other places, you do get pigeonholed as you are a musician. So if you're looking at potentially the way that other national finals recruit, maybe they're going to recording artists, or they're looking at pop singers, and they're not necessarily broadening that reach. Or, and this is one of the issues, is that Eurovision isn't seen as a place to share your art practice, which is a shame because it reaches 1 billion people a year. Look at how many people Constructa reached with her art by going on that stage.
Especially something like Sylvia Night, especially something like Hattori, to need to constantly be on and thinking of how does this character that I am portraying respond to this scenario. It's a lot on top of all of the other stuff that's happening for Eurovision.
It is a lot, but I think the rewards are so fantastic because look at what Hattori managed to accomplish during that week, and even in the lead up to Tel Aviv. Like, they had so many people talking about the contest, the political ramifications of the contest, and they did it in a way which wasn't necessarily quote unquote political, because they did it in a culture jamming style, in like a tongue-in-cheek style, parodying the various elements. So they were able to make it be enough about aesthetics. Same thing about Let 3. They brought a song about Putin and the Belarusian dictator on stage. They brought nuclear weapons on stage. And yet, because they made it be about a children's song, they got away with it because it was seen as parody. So for a lot of this, performance art and being satire and parody can be a way to slip these political messages in that will get past Eurovision rules. Although who even knows what Eurovision rules are anymore?
Oh yeah, no, like it's very hard to determine, like, who is deciding whether something is political or not. Seems to be a very case by case basis.
Right now, my brain is just like all the synapses are firing and like kind of recontextualizing everything about like Windows 95 man and no rules. And it's like, wait, is this actually a critique of what is and like just the layers and layers of critique that could be happening there? And it's just like, oh, I might have to issue a few apologies. And
it nailed the 1990s in a way that was just beautiful. Mm-hmm. It got so much of the 90s culture right. So I know you had in your show notes Lolita Zero, which is very much not performance art
Nope.
to me.
Oh, please explain.
Because Lolita Zero is a character that was actually put together for a Lithuanian film called 03. I don't know if that was like the sequel to 01 or 02, but the song was a tie-in. So it was actually a marketing stunt. And Lolita Zero was the actor showing up like in this film playing the drag queen Lolita Zero and then showing up on the Eurovision stage. The actor, they have their own theater company, but for them it was playing the role of Lolita Zero. So for me, that's not performance art. It's performing art. It's playing a role. And I love the fact that they managed to play it again because Not Your Mother is
exquisite.
It's so good.
It's so good, but yeah, like I had no clue that this is just like a tie-in, a promotion. Like essentially, it's both competing and it's a promotional thing for this movie.
Yes.
Wait. So, like, just so that I am clear, the promotion for the movie was the one where she's smashing the watermelons with her elbow?
Correct. Yes. So that song.
What is this movie? Is it a Gallagher bio? Is it like...
It's an action film. I've seen the trailer. I've not seen the film. It might make a good movie club. I cannot follow the trailer at all, but it looks like a standard action film, and I have no idea how it ties into Lolita Zero in Eurovision.
I'm just now picturing just like a future iteration of Eurovision.lt where it's just Jigsaw from the Saw movies.
And because it would actually be Voldemars Petersons dressed as Jigsaw. This gets back to research on whether or not Eurovision is culture building. So if Eurovision is a way that you can display your culture to the world and showcase your country's culture to the world, then it makes sense to have a performance artist, a Euronoro even, which is a poet, going out to the world because you're showcasing culture in a cultural place. But if you come from a country where Eurovision is seen as camp spectacle, it's not seen as a high cultural event. So therefore, you're not going to be attracting people who are high culture to the event, as it were. And that might be why we're seeing Eastern European countries, why we're seeing Iceland. You're seeing countries where what they put on stage helps to define them nationally. And if part of that national definition is we have an art scene that we want you to know about. Even this year, Raven from Slovenia, she is performing with Slovenian opera companies. So this is a way for them to also not only promote her as a pop star, but promote the classical music scene in Slovenia. So, and now people know about, even though they may not have been concentrating on any of that when they watched Raven. But there are these undercurrents and layers of what you can then sell about your country. And if you are a country like Serbia, even though the song is in essence talking about your bad national health insurance system and how it's not recognizing artists, it is also something which is getting you noticed on stage and is promoting a good news story about Serbia. Hey, this Serbian artist is doing well in Eurovision. And this cultural story, our culture is being celebrated. So it really does come back to kind of that national identity and what you're promoting.
I'm thinking of someone like Bambi Thug, where I think the knee-jerk reaction would be to describe what they were doing as performance art. But in the context of how we've been discussing it in this conversation, like that's not what Bambi Thug was doing isn't really emblematic of what you would expect of Irish culture.
Although I don't know that performance art needs to be emblematic of a culture. I think Bambi Thug had great staging, but Bambi Thug, for me, is more about being a musician with a specific look and identity.
It feels more driven by the aesthetic. I feel like everything around Bambi Thug's performance this year was around that 3 minutes on stage. It's not necessarily on the level of how does Bambi Thug, the character, respond to this sort of question at the press conference.
Yeah,
like that was very much as an artist and as a performer, not necessarily adding that additional meta level.
Bambi Thug is Bambi Thug. Bambi Thug is not an alternate persona for an artist. So there's no separation between Bambi Thug and who Bambi Thug is. Whereas Konstrakta's Anna Doric, like, they are authentically Bambi Thug, and you'll get that on and off stage, and they're not kind of constructing or presenting a performance.
I think I get it.
Again, like, what even is art? Which is
Yep. Thank you so much for helping break this down with us, because I have kind of a handle on what performance art is. It's like, I really love like modern and contemporary stuff where they're like, where it's very process driven, and a lot of performance art is very much about the process and everything that goes into it.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I feel like if you look at, in particular, what Konstrakta is doing, it is very process driven, especially in Incorpore Sano and in Nova Boye from this year. There is a specific series of steps that she's following to get to the outcome. Yeah.
Amazing. Is there anything that you'd like to plug or share? Do you have a link to that trailer for the Lolita?
I will send you the link to the trailer for the Lolita Zero. Yeah, which has like maybe like 5 seconds of Lolita Zero. It's very much more like a buddy cop trailer.
That's going to do it for this episode of the EuroWhat. Thanks for listening. The EuroWhat podcast is hosted by Ben Smith. That's me. And Mike McComb.
That's me. Thanks again to dood-pwah for joining us, and you can find us on our socials at EuroWhat. If you'd like to help support the show and access a ton of bonus content, head on over to patreon.com/EuroWhat.
You can access our full archive of episodes going all the way back to 2018 on our website, EuroWhat.com.
Next time on the EuroWhat, we'll be checking in with Eurovision headlines as selection season approaches.